collective dependence. We're also talking about the indigenous and tribal communities who are often depend on these lands for carrying out their rights and rituals. Of course, in Rajasthan's Oran community is the biggest example of such. The legal challenges are that compensation is often only given to the land title holders, and that is also not adequate. There are, and given the recent judgment, which actually exempted all the solar and wind projects to be exempted from ESIS is a big issue. Land reservation for RE projects also, it started competition and prevent fair compensation, which was seen very recently, in fact a couple of weeks ago, where Rajasthan's government decided to freeze some land for these projects, but then it redacted from its statement saying that it was actually unfair to the landowners present in the area. So we believe therefore that there is a need for mapping these land dependencies and dependence. So there are often communities who depend on land in multiple ways, not only for livelihood and crop cultivation or agriculture, but also for basic necessities like shelter, food, water, even cultural identity and social networks are pretty much integrated within them. Of course, women, landless workers, pastoralists, they're often almost always invisible in compensation frameworks. There's also ecological dependence, a category of dependence which are often considered in the site selection. So we believe that without mapping these land dependence and dependencies, one, communities lose their livelihoods and resource access, which already exacerbates their poverty and inequality. Second, projects face delays, protests, litigation. And third is biodiversity loss, which therefore undermines climate resilience. And we believe that it will enable one, conflict site-sensitive selection, exploring fair compensation, benefit sharing models, co-ownership and co-management options as well. So the three big questions therefore are that one, who are these land dependents that we're talking about? Two, how are they impacted by this energy transition? And third, and a super big question, is that what can be done to make this transition truly just and inclusive for these land dependents? So this of course is a busy slide, but so this is just our attempt to map who these dependents are, what they depend on land for, and how RE expansion increases vulnerability. So in the first block sort of that table, I've defined human dependence, and in the second half there are the non-human dependents as well. So looking at the human dependence, of course, they're small and marginal farmers, and they depend on arable land, soil, groundwater. And of course, when RE expansion happens, there's a permanent loss of cropland by outright sale, loss of seasonal income, inadequate compensation for tenant sharecroppers and landless agricultural laborers also, who depend on seasonal wages and who migrate also because of their needs. They are simply excluded from any compensation or benefit sharing schemes. There's loss of casual work when land is converted for an RE project. Of course, there's no title to lease agreements as well. For pastoralists and herders also, what they depend on is the commons and the grazing corridors. And because of RE expansion, their movement is restricted, which of course leads to forest shopping as well. For tribal and indigenous communities, it's the forests and the non-timber forest produce they depend on, which is of course lost out, especially when they are forced to be displaced. Women is a dependent across all the groups, and they are often dependent on the land for fodder, water, informal income, fuel, etc. And from title-based compensation, they're almost often included because they're not even the land type holders themselves. And this can also lead to their increased time burdens, which they're already overburdened with. And even when an RE project comes up, they have no access to skilling. Even if they're skilling, there's no opportunity for them to connect with the market. Lastly, the panchayats and gram sabhas, of course, they're bypassed in deals often. And the non-human dependents in general, they are dependent on that very broadly for their habitat continuity, on floral and fauna resources that are present, to recharge these ponds, canals, irrigations that are used. And when RE expansion happens, the habitat loss is one big factor which leads to their increased vulnerability. So certain opportunities that we identified that can be taken place by the RE developers across the project lifecycle. So the black font is actually the opportunity themselves, and the red is the challenges associated with it. So, for example, for pre-project, there could be mapping done on land use and dependencies, ESIs, data collection, exploring co-designing before the project even starts with these communities present. The challenge with them, of course, is that there are limited recognition of these rights. There's power asymmetry, and local communities in general are often excluded from this process. In the land acquisition stage, of course, co-ownership and revenue models are encouraged. Multi-use lands for agrivoltaics, for example, or even mine repurposing, where mines are present and we want to get RE projects there. That could be explored. Guaranteed rental dependencies, of course, is a continuous opportunity that should be tapped throughout the project lifecycle. Public disclosures are again super important. I will skip the challenges actually with the little repetitive. In the construction phase, local employment for civil works, logistics, fencing, cleaning should be considered. There should be preference given to local businesses instead of migrated labor that we get from the urban areas. Women's groups can specifically supply services regarding food, stitching, housekeeping, especially in the coal-dependent regions which are happening vertically. So if we develop a skill training center, for example, they can find ways for getting employed, which has been seen through multiple CSR initiatives. Operations and maintenance phase. In this phase, we can also look at long-term local jobs in planning and monitoring. Skilling for technicians and community interface roles, which are specifically related to grievance. In the post-commissioning phase, which is of course also related to the fourth phase of operations and maintenance, we could also think about maybe setting up new or small agro-processing, cold storage industries. New industries can be looked at, and especially for women-led micro-enterprises. And then the last is end of life or decommissioning stage. This is the stage which I believe is super underexplored, because there's not a lot of forced regulation around dismantling, recycling, or repurposing of these solar panels or the wind infrastructure. Land restoration and rehabilitation roles can be taken up by the local communities themselves as well. And reconversion of land for agriculture is something that again can be looked at by these project developers. And lastly, I truly believe that there are these enabling factors which are already present in the ecosystem, which can lead us to think about making this process a more inclusive process for the in the 21st century energy transition system that is in place. With that, I will stop. Thank you.
Yeah, good presentation. I think let us have Anjali the first online round. Gaurika, are you ready? We can't hear you.
I just have to share my slide.
Yeah. So you to go next.
Right. I'll just share my slide.
Please hold your thoughts. We'll have some questions right at the end. Write it down. Don't forget it. You need to ask questions to the researchers. Yes, Gaurika.
Yes,
Go ahead.
I'm just sharing my screen. Yes. Is it visible to all of you?
Yes.
Alright.
It is.
So, the title of my presentation is towards the just energy transition juxtaposed to land rights. So if we see India's RE transition, renewable energy transition, it's very top down, and it's very centralized, and the local issues are brought into of the top-down decision making which is taking place in case of renewable energy transition. Let me start with the India's commitment towards the Paris Agreement, or if we see the Sustainable Development Goals also. The commitment which is happening in Paris Agreement or the SDGs, if we constitutionally see the transition which is happening, in Indian Constitution having the power to, to achieve our commitment towards global commitments towards these international treaties is derived from Article 253 of the Indian Constitution, which says that the Parliament has the power to make any law for any part of India or for the whole of India in order to fulfill the commitments towards in order to fulfill the global commitments. So this is, on the one side there are global commitments which are, in which through which we are moving towards renewable energy transition, and through the nationally determined contributions from 2021 to 2030, we have highlighted three focus areas of what we want to focus upon. So the first is how we need to reduce our emission intensity of its GDP by 45% by 2030. Second is that we need to reduce 50% of our energy from non-fossil fuels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2070. So this is, kind of global commitments which we need to achieve, because India is signatory to the Paris Agreement, and India also has to achieve the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from 2015 to 2030. But this is, completely, I would say, juxtaposed or antagonistic to the local issues, because in local issues, if you realize that there is a lot of discrepancies in land records. What about the land rights of the vulnerable population, access to common property resources, land disputes, plurality of land tenures? So the global commitments has not been integrated with the local issues. So this is where the problem lies, that on one side we are talking about the just energy transition, but on the other hand there are also land rights of the people which are completely ignored. We are talking about the COP30. Recently, we'll be discussing about COP30, but in COP30 also this land rights have become a major issue, that we cannot talk about climate change, or we cannot talk about just energy transition without completely circumventing the land rights of the vulnerable communities. I just want to focus upon the global energy share in 2024. If you see the world share in the clean energy, which is wind, and I'm primarily focusing on wind and solar energy. So if you see the share of the world share right now is at 15%. And if you see India is at 11%. So India is not very far from where the world is, but if you compare it with with other regions of the world, like if you compare it with European Union is at 29%, or for example United States or China, both are at 17 and 18%. If you see fossil fuel share also, India at present in 2024, India's fossil fuel share is 78%. So which means that we are making our efforts, but still we are very much behind the fossil fuel share. This is the global energy share which is there in 2024. On the right hand side, I want you to see what is India's wind and solar energy generation between 2000 and 2024. In 2015, we were just producing 39.31 terawatt per hour of solar energy generation. In 2020, from 39, we are now, it has now, in 2020, from 39 terawatt, we have now achieved 119 terawatt. And in 2024, it is 215.3, which means that there has been a phenomenal rise. On one side, still our in terms of global energy share, we are still behind some of the countries like European Union or United States of America or China, but there has been an exponential growth in terms of India's wind and solar energy transition. And we have to keep in mind that this exponential growth towards achieving our global commitments for achieving the targets which are there in Paris Climate Treaty, or which are there in the Sustainable Development Goals, this needs to be integrated, this needs to be aligned with our local issues as well. So I want to flag some of the issues which are there. Like if you look at land issues per se from the constitutional legal structure, land is a state subject. It is entry 18 and 1945, which specifically deals with land records management, land management. But if you talk about land acquisition, or if you talk about energy per se also, that is there in the concurrent list. So concurrent list, both states and the center both have the jurisdiction to make decisions as far as the subjects which are mentioned in the concurrent list. And also center has more power. Center has residuary powers. So therefore that that thing is there that every state has its own jurisdiction over land as a state subject. So that also creates a problem that every state has to develop its own mechanism for allocation of land for setting up of renewable energy projects. In terms of land conflicts, also I've taken this data from Land Conflict Watch. By November 2025, till now we have 34 land conflicts which are specifically dealing with renewable energy projects. It has affected 29,949 hectares of land. Approximately 52,000 people have been affected out of it, and it has resulted in a total loss of more than 70,000. It has affected 70,838 crore rupees. In terms of land rights also, like Rajasthan is one of the famous examples which is there, that the oral land or the sacred groves which are there in Rajasthan, because community sacred groves is not only important for communities, it is also very much important for the ecosystem. It is also very much important for sustaining the ecology, because it plays a fundamental role in preservation of natural resources, for preservation of biodiversity, for endangered species, for water resources, also for prevention of soil erosion. And in this, communities play a very important role as primary decision makers in managing, nurturing, and protecting the forest ecosystem. Recently, last year, in the Kota Barwan case, oral land has now been declared as the forest land, and it has now got protection under the Wildlife Protection Act. It has now got protection under the Forest Conservation Act of 1980, and also the Forest Rights Act of 2006. But it is yet to be seen that how far we will be able to protect these lands, because a lot of forest land has also been diverted for non-forest use. And also with regard to FRA implementation, we have seen that community forest rights are still, implementation of community forest rights is still not very robust as compared to the individual forest rights. Access to common property resources extremely important, because vulnerable communities they are extremely dependent on the land and on the common property resources. Then land disputes is also a major issue which gets completely ignored when we talk about this transition towards renewable energy, because more than one third of the cases, in civil courts are related to land disputes. So, in oral land also, we have seen that, the Rajasthan government was particularly focusing on why there should be more acquisition of wasteland. So, in the revenue reports, it was said that it was a wasteland, but still, when you talk to the communities, or that issue was also taken up in the court, so people had, contested that it's not a wasteland, but it's a private khatedari land, or it's a land, it's a oral land. So therefore, there is a contradiction, there is some kind of a misalignment when we talk about the land issues and the global energy transition. Next thing which I really want to focus upon is how governments are channeling this, how state governments are channelizing this shift towards renewable energy transition. So every state government is coming up with its own renewable energy policy, and I am particularly focused on Rajasthan and Karnataka. So Rajasthan came up with the Rajasthan Renewable Energy Policy in 2023, and Rajasthan model is focusing particularly on the public leasing model. As compared to Karnataka Renewable Energy Policy, it is for 5 years, 2022 to 2027, and it is based on private leasing model. If I talk about
Gorika, you have 2 minutes more.
Right, ma'am. I'll just finish in 2 minutes. So if you talk about Rajasthan, in the public leasing model, it is the state government which is facilitating allotment of government land, and it is primarily saying that we should use more of productive use of wasteland. So state government is facilitating allotment of government land as per the Rajasthan Land Revenue Rules of 2007. Whereas in Karnataka, the responsibility of renewable energy project developer is with the project developer to acquire or lease the land. It is not with the state government. And in Karnataka, it has to align with Section 109 of Karnataka Land Reforms Act of 1961. Whereas in Rajasthan, if you want to acquire a land for renewable energy project, for private land renewable energy projects has to be set up on land without Now, there is no need for requirement for land conversion as per Land Tenancy Act of 1956 or as per the Rajasthan Land Revenue Act of 1956. There is no need for getting that permission, getting that requirement of land conversion. Whereas in Karnataka, you need to align with Section 109 of Karnataka Land Reforms Act of 1961. Also, from Gram Panchayats also there is no need to in Rajasthan there is no need to get a no objection certificate from Gram Panchayats if you want to set up a wind monitoring station. So I'll just conclude that what we need is we need a decentralized approach in order to mitigate the trade-offs and in order to mitigate the transaction cost. It is also very much important that Panchayat should play an important role in democratic decentralization, in decision making, and we need to integrate the land rights into climate action goals. Whether we talk about renewable energy transition, so these cannot be in silos. What we are doing right now is we are talking in terms of silos. We are not integrating land rights into renewable energy transition, or we are not integrating land rights into climate action goals. These needs to be synchronized, these needs to be talked together. Only then we can have a sustainable policy for a robust renewable energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Gaurika. Thanks a lot. Next, please.
Yes, yes. Okay, greetings everyone. I am Dr. Kailash from Maharashtra National Law University, Nagpur. Basically today I am presenting my research paper, which is a working paper. Actually I am working on it and it's not finished yet. It's about assessing the impact of climate change vis-a-vis sustainable land governance with the community-led approach for the development of Bhil tribal community with special reference to the Narmada SSP Dam of Nandurbar districts. This particular research is basically focuses upon how land as a resource and it's sustainably governed by the tribal community which is residing in river basin of Narmada in Nandurbar district. So when we are talking about tribal people and their land rights, they are fully dependent on land, forest and natural resources which is available at their places. So when we are talking about the dam and displacement, tribals are neglected in the developmental process. This is a one stand, and another one is that is there any kind of a developmental model which is inclusive for the Bhil tribes which is residing in the Veri river basin, which they sacrifice their land for the developmental, that huge developmental project is going on and is finished now. So with this context, I am dealing with the Bhil tribes issue of a river basin which are staying or residing at the. If you talk about the Bhil tribes, Bhil includes Vasave, Vadvi, Parvi, including Paura as well. So Bhil having largest population in the Maharashtra, and this is a tribal village or tribal districts of the Nandurbar districts of Maharashtra. When we are talking about Bhil tribes, Bhil occupied their own kind of a worship with the land, with the forest, with the hills, etc. So their livelihood and the cultural existence is basically depend on the land and their coexistence with the natural resources as well. So if we look at the very Bhili language which is spoken by the Bhil and Paura community, or the Bhili cultures which is going on, if we look at the very traditional dress code of a Bhili woman, or the other kind of practices which is followed since the generation. So all these Bhils which is resisting against the Narmada Dam project because they are not properly not recognize displaced area as well as not properly rehabilitate at the various colonies. So with this particular paper explores the dynamics of how community land governance practices there in hill tribes, how these current hill practices are in contemporary world facing many kind of challenges regarding the commercialization, increased chemical dependency of agriculture, livelihood impacts on dam consumption, as well as the various traditional governance or customary practices available in the hill community, which is with respect to PESA Act, FRA Act, and other constitutional governance which is working for the hill tribes. So this particular paper deals in a both mixed method. I use community-centered approach to trace out how hill tribes is facing various issues in Narmada Valley. And if you look at the very dam constructed in the Kevadia colony, Gujarat, where Statue of Unity is constructed, and you know this is a big kind of a development related to tourism in India as well as global. So with respect to tribes of Nandurbar, they are very much dependent on the forest as well as land governance. So all these are the research questions. I'll skip this. But when we are talking about the data collection in hill tribes, which is residing in very remote, hilly and inaccessible areas of Narmada River basin, so I went there for field study. I conducted a village survey in submerged villages such as Sinduri of Maharashtra, of Akkalko Taluka of Nandurbar district, and again I went to the Savria Diga and other 4-5 paras of the Savria Diga, which is located in the Dhargaon Tehsil. So with respect to all this constitutional governance, you very well known about this constitutional governance, so I will not deal with that aspect. But if you look at the very constitutional governance, this is the pictures which is taken by me during the empirical study. These people are migrating for the labor work, for the sugar factories and some kind of other works which is generally unskilled kind of work. They are so. As we talking about fifth schedule or the PESA governance or FRA governance, they are largely ignored by the government as well as the community as such. So, if you look at the very 3,000 and 1,600 people, families were displaced from the Narmada basin, but what are about those people who are residing in the valley? Whether they are benefiting by the dam project and is have any kind of impact of that particular project on tribal livelihood. So I have identified all these issues that submerged villages, which is a kind of a tapu area. You can see that all these hilly areas are cultivated by the tribals, and all these are area nothing but a tapu area or iceland kind of area where no access to go to the farmlands, etc. So people are struggling for daily livelihood to cultivate their lands and to get some kind of vegetables from the forest, etc. or for the husbandry purposes which you look at. So with respect to the land governance and community practices, they are saying that huge biodiversical impact is there on their livelihood as well. Adverse impact is there on of climate impact on their livelihood, as all they are agreeing that due to increase of heat waves, increase of temperature, increased use of chemicals, and their governance related to traditional farming is gone away, and they are basically farming the products which are dependent on the commercialization, etc. So if you look at the very crop patterns of the traditional farmings, they are doing the traditional farming, but that traditional farmings of crop products have no at all valued at the market basis. So they are not commercial, they are not taking these particular crops for the commercial purpose. So when we look at the forest tribes, so all these submerged villages are having a status of forest village. They are not recognized as a revenue village, and that's why the governmental schemes are not implemented properly in these villages. If you look at the very customary practices over the land, Vagdev, Himalayadev, and all other the natural belief related practices are fully dependent on the hills and the forest, etc. So all these are ignored part. If you look at the very traditional panchayats working over there, 25% of the tribal peoples are fully dependent on traditional panchayat. They are conserving water, forest and traditional management practices are there. Community decision making for the marriage related issues or the some traditional conflict mechanism, etc. So all these are traditionally governed. But when I inquired about their awareness about the PESA Act or land related protection, etc. So they are unaware about their PESA and FRA rights, but they are practicing all the traditional methods of the community transactions or the governance, etc. So you can use see this that only 7% peoples are 7% peoples are using the dam water for drinking purposes. Yes, they are not using this particular dam water, which is very located near to their homes, their farms, etc., which is only away 10 to 20 feet, but not usable at all for the agriculture purposes. So we have to think that how that particular submerged area or the submerged peoples can use that particular water for their irrigation or the agriculture purpose. Then we can thought about that there is some increase in the productivity as well regarding this, because all these peoples are migrated for the unemployment issues, because there is no such kind of employment generation in the project or valley areas as such. If we look at the very project FRA claim, etc. So many people are claiming that they are cultivating the forest land or they are dependent on the forest land for their livelihood, but that all the forest right claim, whether it is community or individual forest right claim, that are not recognized, or on the paper only they have not get any kind of a title or the claim of that particular forest right which is traced by this particular study. When we look at the very context of dam displacement and how that tribal community is benefited by this particular project, because you know that Statue of Unity creating huge kind of a employment by the tourism and development related activities, but all these activities are possible in that river basin, but tribals are neglected in that particular aspect as well. If we look at the very fishing kind of income generation methods, traditional fishing they are actively using, but dam is huge, creating huge water and not accessible by traditional means, because we use now or nowdi or a barge, electric boat are there, but they are not feasible to catch any kind of a fish in the river basin. So this is the issue which I have found during this particular empirical study, that climate change drastically impacting on the hill tribe livelihood. They are not generating any kind of a livelihood or any kind of a productivity by this particular dam project. Heat waves are there due to increased water at the Sardar Sarovar Dam. Increase in the temperature is there, because that's why there is no electricity. This is one issue, and that's why they are not using fans and cooler, etc. So sleeping in the night at the Sardar Sarovar Dam is very drastic kind of situations we observed during this study. And apart from this, there is increase of chemical farming, reduction of agriculture productivity is there. There is no kind of employment generation by this particular dam project, and the dependency which is there by the tribal communities are taken away by this particular project, because at one side there is one hill or the Satpura mountain, and another side there is a dam. So they are trapping in between the dam and hills, and there were no such kind of a governmental initiative regarding access to road, access to school, like any healthcare facilities or any other basic necessity which are we talking about as a constitutional norms or the constitutional governance, etc. So in conclusion, I will conclude that these are the boys which is residing nearby the village in the valley basin, and they have no kind of a educational or other kind of assessment which we can see that this particular dam project is generating any kind of wealth to the hill tribes or not. So at one side, this particular dam project impacting on their livelihood, on their cultural existence, on their livelihood patterns, and any other kind of a dependency as well. Then other side, they are migrating for the daily wages to the Saurashtra or to the Western Maharashtra for the sugar cutting or sugar factories, etc. So all these are the tragedies of Narmada Valley. If you look at the very woman who is she is doing alcohol making practices traditionally. Oh yeah, illiterate women, but they are known how traditional existence or the practice are they are governing or they are governing by that. And another picture, last one, which is there. This particular boy is padding their agriculture products, but they are not using a single drop of water for their agriculture purpose or the farming purpose. So this is a kind of a situations all these river basin peoples are hoping from the government that some initiative were there for their development or the benefit, but this particular SSP dam project in the climate have grossly impacted on tribal initiative. This is this paper is not yet finished, so I am working on recommendation parts and I have to take the governmental concern as well. So I am not jumping to the recommendation and findings part. So this is all about my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, online, the second one. Yeah, let's take the second online and then we'll come to it. You be prepared for the subsequent one. Let's have the next online. Anusha?
Yes.
Are you ready, Anusha?
Yes. I'm just sharing my screen.
Yeah. 10 minutes or less. I will let you know 2 minutes before.
Sure. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Uh,
Make it full screen.
yes. Is it visible now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello everyone. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you so much for accommodating me into this panel online. I think my presentation is a slight deviation from the entirely climate focus, but we will talk about what I call who builds a city, the case of land pooling mechanism and the complexities of transitioning from rural to urban classifications as seen in the city of Amaravati in India, in Andhra Pradesh. So a little background, Amaravati was launched as this dream and promise to the people of Andhra Pradesh right after the bifurcation between Andhra and Telangana in 2024. And this ambitious project basically converted up to 33,000 acres of agricultural land from 24 to 29 villages into one greenfield urban center, proposed greenfield urban center that looked something like this. So this was built right on the edge of the river Krishna, and the idea was basically to include the farmers of the region who own these agricultural plots in the process of city making. So the land pooling scheme was the land assembly mechanism to create this new city, and how the land pooling scheme works is if you have, for example, 100 acres of agricultural land, you voluntarily give that to the government and government of Andhra Pradesh at that time, and then in the future the government would reconstitute that land, reclassify it as urban, and give you back give you back 30% of that land, which is part of your land. And the hope is that the farmers who are losing their land in this process of urbanization, who are losing their agricultural land, will gain speculatively in the future, will have speculative gains in the future from the urban lands. And this kind of led a lot of farmers to part ways with their lands, lose their livelihood in the process, and in the hopes of gaining something in the future. So this is based on my graduate thesis, which basically asks this question from one of my from one of the farmers that I interviewed. who says that this new capital city that we're building, does it belong to all of the citizens of Andhra, or does it really belong to the land pooling scheme farmers? And I think this question is a little complicated, or complicates the idea of creating new cities on existing resources, existing land, or just the idea of greenfield cities in India. And I will talk about how it complicates that notion briefly. So one, this idea of speculative logics of land assembly. So as I said before, there is no monetary compensation as such other than yearly pension or yearly some amount of money that is paid to the farmers, which is very little. So a lot of this rides on a speculative idea of what is going to come in place of the agricultural land. So if you see on my left side, this is the image that people are sold, that this is what is going to come in the place of your land. So this is a drastic change that will materialize drastically and convert whatever existing value that your lands hold into something that is much larger. And it will incorporate all kinds of best practices that include best green infrastructure, or anything that is related to just transitions. But the reality of it, and it is promised to happen in a very tight timeline, which is like 5 to 10 years or 3 to 5 years. So while all of this can be very exciting, what is on site right now, as you can see on the image on the right, is something very usual or very commonplace, and nothing that is related to what is promised. And while this infrastructure is said to be temporary, and there is work continuously going on, that is a much longer process, and that speculative gain is nowhere available for the farmers who have given their land up for this new city. Another issue with speculative logics is this is definitely a technical process of converting agricultural land into urban land, or going through this land pooling scheme and figuring out the mechanics of it. So the benefits of all of this, even in the future or even in the present, flow very disproportionately to the people who are already financially and technically savvy in this region, in this space of land administration or land assembly. And from my fieldwork, what I understand, and from existing scholarship, it's predominantly this benefit or this knowledge is predominantly passed on through caste networks, and the dominant caste of the region who own the land there are able to tap into these benefits, little or whatever little or large benefits there are. And this presentation does not go into all of the financial logics, but if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer. So the next one is, as you can see, that this the capital city is planned right on the banks of the river Krishna, and these are all low-lying lands. These villages are all in the comparatively lower-lying regions, and their value with respect to their land value is also based on their location with respect to the closer city. So across the banks of the river Krishna, as you can see on the image, I don't know if it's visible, but on the image on my right-hand side, the existing metro city in the region is Vijayawada, and the cities 1 and 2, or the villages 1 and 2 that are closer to Vijayawada are expecting higher values of their land versus the other villages that are by the river or further inward. And this is again the hierarchies of like which plots are more valuable versus which are not, is not only based on ideally it's supposed to be something that is more neutral and that is more democratic, but it ends up being based on a lot of market market related reasons, and also this contestation between the dominant caste of the region as to which land is more valuable. So if you see all the
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Okay. So so what I'm trying to say is that that question of like who the city belongs to also gets complicated because of where land is allocated or reconstituted for the people who gave up their land. And lastly, because of the ongoing politics of the region, which we can also go into in the Q&As, there was a time when this whole project was stalled, and the constituents who were the most affected by this are the farmers who gave up their land, lost their livelihood, and are now also facing climate impacts or like issues of flooding and large-scale flooding that they're not able to tackle. Now do not have anywhere to go to or do not have the technical capacity to deal with it. So they become active shapers of this process by protesting for development to happen in the future. Even this though has another layer of who is able to leverage their networks to get work started, and that mobilization and how that mobilization is sustained, mostly sustained through transnational networks, through capital flowing from international regions or people, absentee landlords who are based in the US or in other countries. And again, the power contestation between propertied, dominant agrarian caste and class versus those who are landless but lost their livelihoods anyway in this process is something that complicates that question of who will speak. So I will end on that note, and I'd be happy to talk about it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Who's going to speak?
More than 5 seconds.
So 5 minutes each.
Yes.
Or what?
No, 5 minutes each. We will
It's
receive
more than 10 minutes.
Mm.
I thought you got your second partner to get extra time. You won't get that. This is the last presentation. Just be ready with your, wake up and be ready with your questions. Is it? No. Don't stand, check.
No, these are right. I no, no, it's okay. I'll stand for.
Meet the mic.
Good afternoon. I am Vinona. This is Shistika. Both of us are from the Center for Social Justice. It's an organization that has, for the past 30 years, been working towards using the law as a tool to help marginalized communities access justice. It is largely an organization of lawyers, and the idea is to, through legal aid representation and research that draws from the grassroots, how can marginalized communities get closer to the law, to the courts, to justice. What we're speaking about today draws from this broad argument, and I want to begin with a simple question about who really decides development in India. Oftentimes the answer to this is the government or the legislature. That's where all of the power lies. But what we've seen over the last 4 decades at least is that a lot of decisions about what highways get built, what mines get opened and closed, what lakes get destroyed, what forests get destroyed, these decisions are taken in the halls of the Supreme Court in Delhi. We want to, in the next 10 minutes, go over how the Supreme Court's jurisprudence on sustainable development is not some static, immovable, concrete paradigm. It is something that is constantly shifting. It is affected by a lot of context that exists outside of the court. And the court in many ways has not sort of made up its mind about what it thinks sustainable development can look like. We've chosen especially cases where there is a large intersection with land and how land can be used. And we've grounded this in the broad vision of the sustainable development goals, which give us a language and a baseline on what development should ideally look like. This is mirrored in India's legislative frameworks, India's constitution, which speaks about community participation, equitable access to resources. But despite this, we will see that there are a lot of gaps in implementation. And whenever there is a dispute, whenever there is a conflict between this supposed idea of economic development and environmental conservation, it is the Supreme Court that has the final say and takes the final call. And yeah, we think there's value in looking at how this approach has evolved and where it stands today, and what are the forces that push and pull how the court decides what will happen in a particular case.
So for this study, we did an analysis of Supreme Court judgments over the past 30 years. So we narrowed it down. So this is an ongoing study. So this is just our preliminary findings, and we hope. Yeah. So we'll just be presenting our preliminary findings. So I'll be explaining on how we narrowed down on what cases we'll be looking at. So we first identified sustainable development targets, which looked at the natural resources that we're researching on, such as mining, inland water bodies, and agriculture. So we identified those sustainable development targets. Secondly, we looked at cases on them, and in these cases we analyzed whether the Supreme Court is furthering and using the language of these sustainable development goals or whether it's silent on them. And thirdly, we look at how the decision of the Supreme Court has had an impact on the ecology and what kind of precedents it has set for further cases. Our study is based on 4 broad themes as listed: natural resource governance, land acquisition, commons, and environmental procedures. Due to the paucity of time, we'll just be looking at commons and environmental procedures here. So when I talk about commons, I don't specifically mean common land such as agriculture. Commons here is supposed to be widely interpreted to mean natural resources where the government is the custodian. So we've looked at cases where the use of land and natural resources for development comes in direct conflict, or whether it's in consensus with the community, whether they're taking the views of the community into account, whether they're taking the views of the indigenous population into account. So we're going to look at a couple of cases. The cases here are related to mining, forest dwellers, and agriculture. So we'll start with Samatha versus State of Andhra Pradesh. So this is a landmark case for the right of forest dwellers in India. So this case dealt with an area, scheduled area in Andhra Pradesh, where mining leases were given to non-tribal people. So the main issue was whether such leases can be given, and the court said no. But what the court also did was that it recognized the right of forest dwellers and their right to live and use the resources in the forest. And this is a 1997 case, so this was before the Forest Rights Act was there. So it set the precedents for such a law to be laid down, which later recognized what rights the forest dwellers have and how they can use it. So this furthered Sustainable Development 16 and 15 that we looked at, for taking community participation into account, and also sustainable development by looking at the role of the community. The second case is Narmada Bachao Andolan versus Union of India. So this is a case concerning the Sardar Sarovar Dam. So clearance for this was attained in 1987, but the petition was filed much later. What we also take into account here is that the mechanism of a public hearing was introduced in 1994. So the petition was trying to raise issues of compensation, of displacement of the people, and the effect that it had on the people. But the court said that the petition is being filed at a much later stage, and the dam is already developed to a certain extent. It also has a huge impact on the economy, and it's also bringing about development in the region. So the court narrowly interpreted sustainable development, meaning that to what extent can the natural resource handle it. So it sort of didn't look at the implications that building such a huge project might have, and the community's views were not taken into account, given that the petition was filed much later. So the third case we look at is KM Chinappa versus Godavarman. So in this case, the court sort of developed its view. Before it was looking at sustainable development goals very narrowly, but here in this case of mining, the court said that just because a project has, you've spent certain amount of funds on a project and you've reached a certain stage and it's bringing money, doesn't mean that the project should continue. If the harm is irreversible, then the project should definitely not continue. This was what the court laid down. Now we move to Orissa Mining Corporation case. So now we compare this with what was held in Samatha and how this played a role in Orissa mining. So in Samatha, the rights of forest dwellers were upheld, and in Orissa, this was further built upon. So in the Orissa case, land was being cleared for mining, which was a petition was filed against it. So the court recognized that in Samatha, forest dwellers' rights have been recognized, and how? 2 minutes left. And how
lawyers, so you know how to speak on.
Oh, yeah.
Jackie, you have to hurry.
And how it's necessary for sustainable development. And what the court also did was it recognized the role of local bodies such as the Gram Panchayat. So in this case, this is an exceptional case because the Gram Panchayat hearing was actually done and the communities, a referendum was held of all the community and the project was stopped before it even began. So similarly in the other cases such as State of Jharkhand, the court has recognized the role of the community to be involved in conserving Gauchar land and seeing that just because you're giving an alternative land is not the solution. And Alapina similarly followed what was held in Narmada. So the point in all these cases we see is that the court is taking a progressive view in some cases concerning the views of the community. But when an issue arises of development versus nature, like a dam is already built and whether the dam is to be stopped, then the court often gives leeway to development. So in such a scenario, it's very important for environmental clearances and regulations to be followed. But as we'll see in further cases that Winona will discuss, that the court is not very consistent in its approach and how this causes issues.
I'll be very quick about this. We'll not go into the individual cases, but largely the cases that are on the top of this line, these are cases where the court has laid down very strict guidelines to say that if in the making of a project an environmental clearance was not sought, then it cannot be regularized after the project has been constructed. But simultaneously, you will see that in between these years, the court has also in certain other cases said that even if you seek environmental clearance after the construction of a project, that can be regularized. By the early 2020s, the court had sort of developed now a formula through which ex post facto environmental clearance can be regularized, where the court is looking at whether or not this is a project that has immense economic value, does it generate employment, did the company that made the project seek some environmental clearances at least. So looking at these sort of justifications, the court is now moving towards a space where it largely looks at development projects, even if they haven't sought environmental clearance before construction, looks at regularizing them and trying to strike what they believe is a balance. This initial analysis that we've done of the Supreme Court judgments has left us with 3 broad sort of conclusions that I do want to share here. The first is that there is no linear evolution in which the court looks at sustainable development. It has changed, waxed and waned in many ways over the years, so it's very difficult to predict what the court is going to say when a case of this magnitude comes before it. Second, that the court has largely looked at land as purely an economic asset, where you're looking at things like what sort of value and produce and employment is that piece of land generating, as opposed to its socio-cultural value, its emotional and cultural heritage that the community around it may have to that land. Thirdly, that the Supreme Court is not operating in a vacuum. It's of course operating in this larger context where the executive and the legislature have over the past couple of years consistently pushed towards industrial development and economic growth. And in that sort of climate, how can the court even meaningfully further ecological values if constantly the executive and the legislature are taking steps back? This leaves us with some questions about whether the SDGs are even a meaningful language for the court to use in such cases, whether this dichotomy between development and conservation really exists, or it only silences more structural harms and questions about whom do these cases actually benefit, who is bearing the burden. And lastly, that how can, in all of this, how can communities sort of take center stage? How can the court give primacy to voices of people who are directly impacted by projects and cases like this? These are the questions that we're exploring in the second stage of this paper. I'll end there and I invite any questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So the floor is open now for questions. I think I request the others to come here, please. You can draw chairs. You can come here. Yes.
Don't tell me there are no questions. I have a couple of them. Let me start with the last one. In your presentation, you make it seem as if, and which is often the case, and being a former bureaucrat, I can quite relate to that. It's often made into a question of development versus conservation, nature. Okay. Now, I have to say, and all of you would have studied that much of background history, every country while growing has had this question to answer, whether it was Europe or USA or Australia. Now, just to make you feel good, and also it's factual, there are other countries who have destroyed the atmosphere and the environment and ecology much, much more. They have even gone and killed all their older natives. Okay? We have not done that. So at least kudos to us for that. But at the same time, we have the chance to learn from the mistakes of the others, which we sometimes don't. And I think that is the concern that I feel, that while making it a question of development versus nature, we go to extremes. Uski wajah se, as if we fall through, as if any development is wrong, or as if leaving nature as such is something which is going to cause us harm. It's not that. We have to find the golden mean. What is the right path ahead of us, for us? I think that is where the question lies. What I would like you to address, perhaps, is that, and I don't know if any kind of analysis is done on this, has there been any, or is there any ongoing analysis possible or is going on of the court orders as to how the court views this? Okay, because I have to give an example. There have been cases where the court has asked for the demolition of residential houses. You remember the ones in Cochin, the ones in Noida, huge towers were brought down. Now, such orders, has anything come regarding the conservation of commons or conservation of water bodies from the court? Is there any such study, or are you aware of any such study? I think she's a loud voice, she doesn't need. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for your question. There are multiple angles through which this debate has been looked at, and the Supreme Court specifically, because it is the apex court, its judgments have received a lot of analysis in environmental law. All of the principles that the court has evolved across its jurisprudence also have received a lot of academic interest. There has been a lot of analysis. I think what is sort of missing is and we've been speaking about this, is a sort of statistical look at, can you almost predict what the court is going to say in a particular judgment? So looking at, for example, who are the parties before the court, what is the constitution of the bench, what are the stakes that are involved. That sort of analysis where you're bringing in all of these different variables and then analyzing how the court that has not been done. It has been largely doctrinal, which is what this study also is right now. It's been, substantive or that is the approach that a lot of researchers have taken. But we're yet to come across a statistical or even a mathematical analysis of how the Supreme Court has approached this since the beginning. It's very difficult to also have a start date because the court has the court's understanding and understanding of sustainable development predates even its establishment in international law. So it's much older than the court has even in the early 20th century spoken about balancing these two what they believe are competing interests.
So we have the Kamal Nath versus Union.
Correct, very old cases.
Yes, please, sure.
While these particular conservation and climate related issues, at one side, Justice Nagaratna says that this is nothing but a fundamental right of individual. In last before 2 days, Justice Gavai itself overruled his own judgment, which is laid down by him in May 2025 regarding the environmental clearance. So justices or the benches are recognizing as a concept, but when we are implementing that at a ground level, they are clearing all the projects without any kind of a environmental or community effect on that particular issue. So this is kind of conflict
So the court's
of
also
the bench
learning.
itself.
They're
Yeah.
also learning. Yeah. Which is good, which is a sign of a growing democracy.
Yeah.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I was quite worried to know that the children, there are no schools there for the blind
Uh,
children. How
ma'am,
is it possible?
schools are there, but let me say this, that these schools are only open for the Jhanda Vandan. On 15 August, flag hosting.
Oh,
On 15 August, on 15 August or on 26 January. This is the reality of that
no
particular-
classes, no teachers?
Yeah, teachers are appointed on paper. So all these students are migrated for their education at Nagar or the Pune districts in ashram school or boarding school, or the school which are situated in the ground are JP school, which is run by the government. So all are non-functional schools. They are not functioning at all. And I have ground reports
I
on
have a
that.
request to you. You said you're preparing your
Yes, yes.
concluding remarks.
Yes, yes.
Can you make up a request and send it to the collective?
Yeah.
CC it to me.
Yes,
I'll
yes,
follow it up.
definitely, because before that, no, I work on that particular right to education issue on tribal student over there.
This is
So,
serious.
so I made a complaint to the center, this particular commission, ICCPR, for the children and Human Rights Commission as well. So they directed to the collector regarding the malfunctioning of the school, etc. So there is huge work to done on this particular issue. And I am working on that.
Yeah. Let's
So
do that.
yes, definitely,
Right. Yeah.
definitely.
Thank you. Any questions now? No? Gaurika, you have done some good work on this, and one point you mentioned is about the wasteland and the commons being identified as wasteland. I'm sure you will be aware, I know your background, that commons and wasteland are not synonymous at all.
Absolutely.
I think you need to do some deeper study on that and take it up to make them understand that that's wrong.
Yeah, so that was highlighting that there is a kind of a top-down approach to classify these land as wasteland, because in revenue records, much of the land tenure has been mentioned as wasteland. But when you talk to the communities, either that land is is a private khatedari land, or that land is it's a sacred grove, or it's an foreign land. In Rajasthan there are more than 6 lakh hectares of foreign land, and just classifying them as wasteland and then giving that land for renewable energy project, it completely, misaligns with the land rights of the communities.
And the other thing, for those who, I think you spoke on the RE, didn't you? Yeah. I think, I don't know how many of you are aware of it, or are you missing the point, or have I missed something? When the RE policy has been brought about by the states, the basic requirement is that it has to be decentralized. It has to be modular. Okay?
Absolutely.
These kinds of huge 10,000 acres, 5,000 acres of land being acquired for solar projects is a misnomer. It should not happen. That is not the idea. The idea was it should be in local areas, localized areas, or rooftops. That was the idea. So where are we going wrong? Because by doing this kind of RE, we are actually generating more problems. Are we not?
Yeah, ma'am, perhaps,
Yeah,
I mean,
finally I
Gaurika
will-
can answer, but perhaps my concern is the same. Who are the players in the renewable energy? Same groups
Corporates.
who did the mining in the past,
Yeah, yeah.
and now they are coming with a new avatar
Yeah.
in the name of renewable
And
energy.
you all are quiet.
Exactly, exactly. And even if you see the whole energy geography of India, the all coal minings in the eastern part and the all renewables in the western part of India, right? So this is also creating a lot of different set of energy crisis on the
And I'll
ground.
go on to add, all these solar projects are coming up in tribal areas.
Yes.
Are coming up in so-called quote-unquote commons,
Like,
which they call wasteland.
Yeah, ma'am, just another issue which is actually related with your point. See, if you see the whole category, the number one, again, is a problem of English, right? If you go with the category which is actually defined under the agriculture census, vis-a-vis the categories defined under like Vazibul Urge or Nistar Patra per se for the central India, it's a completely different. In agriculture census, the categories are very fixed, and it's like an agriculture scientist. But while you go with this category under the revenue, I think it's much more realistic because there is a provision. Say for example, the Nistar Patra, whatever the community rights and the common property land or the categories of common property land mentioned in the Nistar Patra is very detailed.
Or the Gairan.
Exactly, and there are various categories. So I think it's also depends on how the local revenue administration or land administration taking which part of the definition for their own purpose. That's also right.
As per the government's convenience.
As per the government's
Without
convenience.
looking into the local
Exactly.
person's
Exactly.
interest. Yeah.
I would also like to highlight the Niyamgiri case, in which rights of Dongliya community was actually protected. In which, ma'am, you were talking about the decentralized approach. So in that decentralized approach was given much more prominence, because it said that Gram Panchayats were the ones who have to protect their land rights. Whether the land has to be given for bauxite mining or not, it is the Gram Panchayats who need to take a decision, because it's a tribal land, it's a scheduled land. But as far as the renewable energy projects are concerned, we are completely circumventing what has been written in the Constitution, what has been written in the Visa Act, what has been written in the Forest Rights Act. It is a complete subversion of the land rights of tribal communities.
In that particular Samta and Niyamgiri judgment
Yes,
is
yeah.
very diluted by recent judgment which is relating to environmental and community rights, etc. in India.
Anything further, Rima?
I would just like to suggest, because there are think tank organization and the Center for Social Justice. I'm just going to take the same thing, because if you just look the number of cases of tribal land alienation pending in the courts, and especially the position of court to decide these cases in the favor of whom, 80%, please believe me, 80% plus cases is actually given, the verdict is actually goes to the non-tribal people or the non-tribal entities. And this is the historical thing, which is, this is the thing which is actually came through the whole judicial system itself. So here I think we need to understand that how to take the reference of 5th and 6th schedule provision, because ultimately, even the Forest Rights Act, I'm from Chhattisgarh, I know that the CFRR entitlement is actually cancelled by the Sarguja collector because the land is going to divert for XYZ companies. Okay. And this is the case. So I think we need to take the stronger reference of the 5th and 6th schedule provision, how to make it like a little more practical or possible on the ground. And that's how in the 5th schedule area, now there's a great demand for let's convert all 5th schedule area for the 6th schedule, because at least in the 6th schedule there is a semi-judicial power with the autonomous district council. Here there's asset, there's nothing.
But with respect to this, if we are looking at the very abrogation of 370, where land autonomy is taken by the central government, that particular issue is now faced by the tribal community because all the 5th and 6th schedule provisions are neglected or the bypass by the very parent legislation like Natural Conservation Act of 2022 amendments are saying that all these tribal protected laws need to be bypassed when it's an issue of public importance or national importance. So this is the kind of conflict going on regarding the tribal or the community rights.
No, the problem is, yes, it's a conflict, no doubt, but conflict is not a solution.
Yeah.
If we are to grow into a super country, global country, we need to solve these problems at the earliest, not wait for it to become festering wounds, as often happens. And as you rightly said, most of the orders are against the tribal community. We know it, and I would say not 80%, I would say 99%.
It's a 99%.
And I have some cases in mind which I'm extremely sore about. So unless you all act now, and unless your research becomes more ground-based and ground-truthed, it may be of no use. So that would be my appeal to the research community and the NGOs and the social activist groups that take up cases which really are relevant to the people who are on the ground, which is making a difference. And don't rehash and do the same work again and again. It's not going to help. And to the people like you who are part of the judicial system, I think a lot of analysis is needed on the kind of orders that have come from the court, that are coming from the court. And it's not to be judgmental, it's to understand the process. See, we are growing, we are learning, and therefore we should know what kind of judgments can be anticipated. And it's not a proud feeling if I hear somebody say that by looking at the judges there and their past history, one can predict what kind of judgment can be anticipated. It's not a very good thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't speak well for a judicial system in a democracy. I don't like it. So I think that would be a takeaway from this session. If there's nothing else, let's conclude here. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you so much.